This program is brought to you by the Vegetarian Society of Hawaii, a nonprofit organization dedicated to sharing with the community the many benefits of a vegetarian diet. Free monthly meetings include vegetarian experts found locally and on the mainland, quick and easy cooking demonstrations, and healthful and delicious food samples. Members enjoy an informative quarterly newsletter, social activities, and discounts at many vegetarian-friendly restaurants and health food stores. For an application, call 944-8344. That's 944-8344. Or visit our website at www.vsh.org. vsh.org.
Aloha, and welcome to the monthly public meeting of the Vegetarian Society of Hawaii. It's good to see all of you here tonight. The Vegetarian Society of Hawaii, as you may know, is currently celebrating our 20th birthday, 20 years of following our mission of promoting human health, animal rights, and protection of the environment by means of vegetarian education. Our four founders, Elaine French, Jerry Smith, Bill Harris here, and Andy Mertz, along with others, perhaps could not have imagined back in 1990 that the Vegetarian Society of Hawaii would not only still be here in 2010, but would also eventually grow to become one of the largest nonprofit vegetarian organizations in the nation. If you're not yet a member, why not join tonight and start getting our informative newsletter and great membership discounts at veggie-friendly restaurants and natural food stores such as Down to Earth that can more than pay for the cost of your membership. We're videotaping tonight's presentation for broadcast on the VSH TV series Vegetarian. On Oahu, you can watch it on Olelo Channel 52 every Wednesday at 11 a.m. and on the first and third Thursdays of the month at 6 p.m. You can also go to our website, vsh.org, that's vsh.org, to see videos of this and many of our other previous presentations. You'll find lots of other great information there, including recipes, our famous dining guide, past newsletters, and even a link to our new Facebook page. It's now time for a special guest. We're delighted to have with us tonight Michael Greger, MD, a founding member of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. Dr. Greger is a physician, author, and internationally recognized speaker on nutrition, food safety, and public health issues. He has lectured at the Conference on World Affairs, the International Bird Flu Summit, the National Institutes of Health, testified before Congress, and was invited as an expert witness in the defense of Oprah Winfrey in the infamous meat defamation trial. He is a graduate of Cornell University School of Agriculture and Tufts University School of Medicine. Currently, Dr. Greger serves as the Director of Public Health and Animal Agriculture at the Humane Society of the United States. Tonight, Dr. Greger will present the latest in Human Nutrition 2010. Please welcome Dr. Michael Greger.
Good evening. For those of you unfamiliar with my work, every year I read through every issue of every English language nutrition journal in the world, so you don't have to. Every year the talk is brand new because every year the science is brand new. I then compile all the most interesting, the most practical, the most groundbreaking work into a quiz show format. In a few moments, I'll ask everyone to stand up, I'll pull back the curtain, we'll play a few games. If you get the answer right, you get to remain standing. If you get the answer wrong, you need to sit down, and we'll keep going to see who the last person is standing. Any questions before we begin? Doesn't anybody want to know what they win? The last person standing each round will bring a brand new CD-ROM created containing 2,000 of the latest, greatest scientific articles published in the literature, categorized by topic, your own personal nutrition library on a disc. It is not for sale. Even if you beg, you need to win it. All right, let's start today with what's the healthiest apple. Now, last time I was here, 2008, if you remember, 5 different varieties of apples were tested. Red Delicious shot to number 1, with Granny Smith's taking a surprise number 2 finish. But people ask me, what about Cortland? What about Empire? What about Macintosh? Someone even asked me, what about crab apples? All me or anyone else could say is we have no idea, because they simply haven't been tested until now. 21 different varieties of apples were tested. I mean, why bite into a Red Delicious when you can bite into a good old 56.9 181 apple? Right? There are actually 7,500 different varieties of apples. But let's look at some crowd favorites. In alphabetical order, Braeburn, Cortland, crab apples indeed, Empire Golden Nugget, Honey Crisp, or Ida Red. All right. Here's the graph, and we have some new winners. Two new winners, putting Red Delicious in its place. We have a new loser, too, less nutritious than even a Fuji. Let's start there. Which is the least nutritious apple up there? Let's get everybody on their feet and find out. With a show of hands, you only get to choose one. Who thinks the least healthy apple is Braeburn? Raise your hand. Who thinks it's Cortland? Crab apples? Empire? Golden Nugget? Honey Crisp? Or Ida Red? All right. Well, the bad apple is Golden Nugget. So if you did not choose Golden Nugget, please sit down. We'll go on to the next round. Which is, what is this one though? What is the healthiest apple? All right. We've got 6 options to choose from. Who thinks the healthiest apple is Braeburn? Raise your hand. Cortland, crab apples, Empire, Honey Crisp, Ida Red. All right. Let's take a bite out of the tree of knowledge. The healthiest is crab apples. Crab apples? Gross. All right, well, wait a second. What about this one, though? What's the healthiest apple you can actually kind of buy in a store, right? All right, let's see. 5 options less to choose from. Who says Braeburn? Cortland, Empire, Honey Crisp, Ida Red. All right, well, the healthiest apple is not Macintosh. It's not Empire, not Braeburn, and not Cortland. Beating out Red Delicious, the healthiest apple you can buy is Ida Red. All right. And we have 1, 2, 3 contestants still in the game. 1, 2, 3. All right. I'm unfortunately going to have to skip over kind of what is the healthiest herbal tea, just because there isn't enough time today. But it and another few dozen of topics I cover over hours and hours in my latest Volume 4 DVD, all proceeds of which go to charity. Regardless of which tea you drink, though, we know, if you've seen my previous year's lectures, not to add milk to tea. As you can see, it completely blocks the beneficial effects of tea. You might as well just be drinking water if you add milk to your tea. But this was for soy milk was tested. Now, the reason that cow milk blocks the benefits of tea, we thought, was because the milk casein actually binds up the phytonutrients, but of course soy milk doesn't have casein in it, so we would assume that soy milk is fine, but you never know until you run the experiment. What do you think? Soy milk blocks the benefits of tea. Is this fact, or is this fiction? All right, what do you think? Fact or fiction? We got fact. Fact? Fiction. All right, well, let's look at the data. This is a measure of the beneficial effects of tea on arterial cells in a petri dish. Here's the control, plain water. Here's plain tea without creamer. As you can see, a big spike in beneficial effects, which are completely blocked when you add milk. And they looked at 3 types of soy milk: sweetened, calcium enriched, and plain soy milk, all of which had the same effect as milk. Fact. Soy milk, the vascular effects of tea are suppressed by soy milk. So I encourage people to drink their tea straight. 2 remaining contestants, but what about kombucha tea? Kombucha is a fizzy fermented drink complete with chunks of slimy fungus. All right. Now, if you base your nutrition knowledge on books you find in health food stores, well then, bestsellers like Kombucha, the Miracle Fungus, will tell you that already. By the Qin dynasty, it was known and honored as a beverage with magical powers, enabling people to live forever. Given the fact that you don't tend to meet many people from the Qin dynasty these days, never believe anything you read in health food stores. What does the science say? Kombucha tea. Is it harmful? Is it harmless? Or is it helpful? Actually, health promoting. All right? What do you think? Bad for you? Neither good nor bad, or good for you? What do you think? Bad. We have a bad for you. In between, not necessarily good, but not necessarily bad. Harmless. All right? Well, look, tea's good for you. Mushrooms are good for you. You put them together? No. Harmful. If you look at the Journal of Intensive Care Medicine, you will see that kombucha tea may pose serious health risks. Consumption of this tea should be discouraged, as it may be associated with life-threatening lactic acidosis. This is just the latest in a series of clinical reports of people ending up in a coma as their blood turned to acid after drinking kombucha. Now, how does it do that? We have no idea. Maybe it's a miracle fungus after all. We have our first winner. Congratulations. All right. Let us do stevia, because I promised to cover it this year. The jury is finally in on this natural 0-calorie sweetener. Harmful, harmless, or helpful? Let's get everybody up and find out. How many people think stevia and 5 stevia-sweetened beverages a day for someone 150 pounds? How many people think that would be harmful? Raise your hand. How many people think harmless? How many people think, no, helpful, actually good for you? We should go out of our way to eat this stuff. All right. Well, the reason the answer has been so long coming is that research out of Japan in the 90s found that stevia size, the active ingredient, the sweet compound within stevia, appears totally harmless. But in the guts of rats, intestinal bacteria turn stevia sides into something called steviol, which is toxic, causing a big spike in mutagenic DNA damage. So the question is, well, wait a second, do we have those same rat bacteria in our guts? And it turns out we do. So we now know that when we eat stevia, these toxic compounds are produced in our colon, absorbed into our bloodstream. The only remaining question is how much, right? That is the question of toxicology. It's the dose that makes the poison. Well, the World Health Organization just released their latest evaluation of food additives, and they consider up to 4 milligrams per healthy kilogram of body weight to be safe. The problem is the American sweet tooth. And if we sweetened everything with stevia, we would actually exceed that safety level. But if you weigh about 150 pounds, then drinking up to 5 stevia-sweetened beverages a day can be considered harmless. Let's do one more quickie. Peanut butter. We know that nuts are good for us, right? But peanuts aren't actually nuts. They're legumes, right? Peanut butter. And let's say for a high-risk population, let's say women high risk for heart disease, is eating peanut butter harmful, harmless, or helpful? Who says harmless? Every day, tablespoon of peanut butter. How many people think harmless? Tablespoon a day. How many people think no, helpful? It would actually be good if you're at high risk for heart disease to eat lots of peanut butter. Well, peanut butter is helpful. Last year, a Harvard study found that women at high risk for heart disease eating a tablespoon of peanut butter a day cut their risk of having a heart attack in half by doing one thing, adding peanut butter to their daily diet. I'll have our remaining few contestants sit down, and I'll get just you back up for the next round. I do just want to take a moment to address heart disease risk, since it is our number one killer. Who needs legumes when we have Lipitor? Right? This is actually a bad year for statins, the cholesterol-lowering drugs. Now, we've known about their potential to damage the liver. That's why you need to get your liver function test regularly when you're on these drugs. We have new data now on their muscle toxicity. Now, we've known that between 1 and 5% of patients actually suffer enough muscle damage to cause acute weakness and pain. But only about 1 in 6 or 7 million people actually suffer enough muscle damage to kill them. It's called fatal rhabdomyolysis, where your muscles break down so rapidly that your urine starts looking like this as you literally kind of pee your muscles down the toilet, and then your kidneys fail and you die. But that's like winning the lottery chances, right? There's a 1 in 2 chance that Americans will die of heart disease, so no wonder that Lipitor is the number one most prescribed drug on the planet Earth. But then, this study was published last year. Now, normally if you have muscle pain on a statin, you go to your doctor, and they take a blood test and see if you have muscle breakdown products in your blood. And if you don't, they say, it's all in your head, go home, keep taking your drug. But what these researchers did for the first time is took these patients and actually did muscle biopsies to see what was happening to their muscles. And they found that even though the muscle breakdown products weren't leaking into the blood, they were indeed suffering muscle damage. And, well, wait a second, if that's the case, I mean, if you can't pick up the muscle damage on a blood test, maybe everyone taking statins is suffering muscle damage whether they're experiencing pain or not, and that's exactly what they found. Clear evidence of skeletal muscle damage in statin-treated patients, all statin-treated patients. Now, but still, the degree of overall damage is slight, so what's the big deal? This is the big deal. New study, statin therapy, muscle function, and falls risk. Hundreds of older men and women fall for a few years, and those who were on statins suffered greater declines in muscle strength, muscle quality, and greater increases in falls risk. So we do not want to be taking these drugs unless we really need to. The problem is that because heart disease remains our number one killer, most everyone does need to take a statin every day for the rest of their life. Except for one group. Only pure vegetarians, for practical purpose, do not need statins. Most everybody else does. This is from the American Journal of Cardiology last year. So it's our choice. So that's our number one killer. What about our number two killer? How do vegetarians fare with cancer? Well, the most comprehensive study on vegetarian cancer rates was published last year. No surprise, vegetarians had significantly lower cancer rates than meat eaters, but perhaps the most striking finding was how low the rates were for lymphoma and leukemia among vegetarians. Only a quarter of the risk, for example, of multiple myeloma and aggressive incurable cancer of the bone marrow. Now, this was over in Britain. Here in the United States, the NIH AARP study, the largest forward-looking study on diet and health in history ever conducted, looked at the same thing: diet, lifestyle, and acute myeloid leukemia. Two things seemed to do it: smoking and total meat intake. And what they meant by total meat intake was all types of beef, poultry, fish, pork, etc. Now, since they measured the effects of both smoking and meat intake, we actually have this rare opportunity to compare the two in terms of risk. So in terms of our risk of getting this rare but deadly blood cancer, according to the largest study ever, this much meat, 2 boneless chicken breaths worth, increases our leukemia risk as much as smoking 10 cigarettes every day. All right? Half a pack a day habit. Why, though? I mean, we know what's in cigarettes, but what's in the meat? Well, potential mechanisms, as described, posited by the authors, include these mutagenic compounds and then viruses in the meat. Now, last year, for those who saw my 2009 talk, I talked about butcher's warts, the condition that affects those who handle fresh meat for a living, but because the virus is in meat, but it's more than just a cosmetic issue. Earlier this year, a landmark study of cancer mortality in poultry workers was released. Now, we've known that people who handle a lot of fresh meat get a lot of fresh chicken, get a lot of warts on their hands, but the concern is that some of these wart viruses are oncogenic or cancer-causing. Workers in the slaughtering and processing plants are exposed to these oncogenic viruses, some of which are the most potent cancer-causing agents known in animals. But what about for people? Well, compared to the general population, poultry workers appear to have excess cancers of the mouth, nasal cavities, throat cancer of the tongue, tonsils, cancer of the inner ear, down the esophagus, rectal, anal cancer, and poultry workers have more liver, bone marrow, and blood cancers as well. Now, the reason it's so important to study this group of people is because it's possible that these cancer-causing viruses found in poultry and poultry products could be transmitted to anybody handling raw poultry. Now, proper cooking can kill off any and all chicken, wart, and cancer viruses, but the problem is meat may come into our homes fresh or frozen and may contaminate a kitchen surface, or our hands, or the sponge, or a utensil before making it into the pot. Similar concerns with other meat, pork intake, and human papillomavirus, HPV, which causes cancerous anal and genital warts. Poor guy, 19 years old, giant warty tumor, an inch in diameter, protruding from the tip of his penis. They cut off the tumor, it grew right back again. And so they asked for a dietary history. Turns out he was eating nearly a pound of pork a day. And they told him, look, stop the pork, and the tumor completely regressed on its own, totally disappeared. The doctors were so blown away, they even went as far as to suggest that the low cervical cancer rates in Israel are because they eat so little pork. We've seen headlines like this, right, suggesting that infection with certain viruses can contribute to obesity. Well, according to a new review published this year, viral obesity, fact or fiction? Well, it all started 20 years ago. A never-before-described poultry virus emerged, killing thousands of chickens. That's par for the course. But the strange thing about this new virus is that the survivors became fat. Now, normally, you suffer a severe viral infection, you lose weight. But infection with this virus made them gain 50% more abdominal fat than uninfected birds. This was the first virus ever discovered to actually cause obesity. And the virus is spread through feces, so you take one fat-infected chicken, put it in a room, then all the chickens become fat and infected. And the kicker is that it didn't happen by increasing their appetite. They ate the same amount of food, but the infected birds just started piling on tummy fat anyway. So researchers immediately started taking blood samples from overweight people to see if they were infected with the chicken virus. And not only did they find that 1 in 5 obese humans test positive for the obesity-causing chicken virus, but those exposed to the virus weighed 33 pounds more than those who weren't exposed. This is in kilograms, but as you can see, those positive for the virus weighed about 210 pounds, Those testing negative, about 177 pounds, 33 pounds different. Infectobesity, obesity of infectious origin. So where does this leave us after 20 years of research? Well, the recognized risk factors of obesity, well known. Certainly there's a whole bunch of them. Lack of exercise, food habits, etc. Now, all these factors are components of a multifactorial model of obesity. The current evidence adds to our knowledge that viral infection could probably be considered another component cause, although not a necessary cause of obesity in humans. Meaning we can be fat all on our own without help from a chicken virus, but it may be one reason why for some people the pounds just don't seem to come off. Maybe that's one of the reasons why, in a study of 40,000 men and women last year, one of the foods most closely tied to human abdominal girth was poultry consumption. Now, of course, it may be just because chickens these days are so fat. See, now we confine animals, we genetically manipulate them, pump them full of growth hormones, deny them exercise. How fat have our chickens got? Well, according to the USDA, 100 years ago, a serving of chicken had only 16 calories. Right? That's half the calories of a brown rice cake. Now, that same serving size of chicken has over 200 calories. That's the calories in a scoop of ice cream. Right? And the fat went from less than 2 grams to more than 20 grams of animal fat per serving. That is 2 scoops of ice cream, right? So now the same serving size of chicken has 10 times more calories, 10 times more fat. So that could well explain why chicken consumption has been so tied to human abdominal girth, no viral component necessary. In fact, the chickens themselves may be technically obese, raising the concerns, well, wait a second, does eating obesity cause obesity in the consumer? Well, a chicken carcass now contains 2 to 3 times the energy coming from fat compared to protein. Children may think that they're still feeding their children a low-fat product, as it was when they were kids, but are unknowingly feeding their children on a high-fat product. And this cocktail for gene selection, for accelerated weight gain, etc. Simple, well-understood recipe for obesity. These researchers at the Institute of Brain Chemistry go as far as to suggest that this change in our chickens may be in part why we've seen skyrocketing human mental illness in the last few decades. Although the intensification of chickens alone cannot be responsible for this rise in brain disorders, it's part of the package of our changing food system that's ignored the nutritional requirements of people, and specifically in this case, for the brain. There's a new superbug in town, Clostridium difficile, known in short as C. diff. You may remember superbugs from such hits last year as MRSA, methicillin-resistant Staph aureus, now killing more people than AIDS every year in the United States. Now, MRSA used to just be something you picked up in hospitals, but then all of a sudden there were all these community-acquired infections we didn't know where it was coming from. Then we discovered MRSA in pigs, veal calves, chickens, and dairy cows. Aha! So then they tested farm workers and found that half of them were carrying it, so then they tested the meat and found MRSA right off of supermarket shelves here in the United States. In the hospital, we have something called contact precautions, right? You can't even walk into a room with a person with MRSA without a glove mask and gown. I mean, even if you're not going to touch the patient, they're just so afraid you might touch some contaminated surface, you can't even get into the room without looking like this. Right? Yet we still let kids run up and down the meat aisle in supermarket, even though that's where MRSA has since been confirmed. What does the meat industry have to say? Well, the meat industry counters that only 5% of retail meat so far in the U.S. tested has MRSA on it. Which is true, but if you went up to an infectious disease specialist, handed them an object and said, oh, by the way, there's a 1 in 20 chance that this has MRSA on it, they wouldn't touch it. And if they were forced to, they would certainly put on gloves, right? What about C. diff, though. C. diff used to be something you just picked up in the hospital. But then there were all these community-acquired infections. We had no idea where it was coming from. Then we discovered C. diff in calves, cows, chickens, and pigs. Starting to sound familiar. Then they tested the meat and found C. diff right off of supermarket shelves. 42% of retail meat samples contained toxin-producing C. diff. The riskiest meat was ground turkey for some reason, although relatively common in retail chicken too, and out of legs, wings, or thighs, the riskiest body part of the carcass were chicken's wings. Now, MRSA caused these nasty skin infections, but what does C. diff do? Well, normally nothing. I mean, even if you get infected, your guts get colonized with C. diff, usually your good bacteria can muscle it into submission. But it just waits patiently until you have to take an antibiotic or something, and with your good bacteria out of the way, C. diff can go crazy and cause a severe infection of your colon called pseudomembranous colitis, which can get worse and even turn to a life-threatening condition called toxic megacolon. This man is not pregnant. This man has toxic megacolon. Yeah, but, people don't eat raw poultry. I mean, doesn't cooking kill off most bugs? Well, C. diff isn't like most bugs. I mean, for most meats, 71 degrees Celsius is the recommended internal cooking temperature to kill off bugs. Well, that's what the meat thermometers are supposed to meet. Well, C. diff can survive 2 hours at 71 degrees C. I mean, you could grill chicken for 2 hours, still not kill off C. diff. You know those alcohol-based hand sanitizers that say they kill 99.99% of germs? Well, you know that other 0.01%? C. diff. They don't call it a superbug for nothing. And then residual spores are readily transferred by a handshake, even after the use of this alcohol-based hand rub. So you don't want to touch raw meat, and you don't want to touch people who've touched raw meat. One of the reasons we've been increasingly plagued with these new superbugs is because of the mass feeding of antibiotics to farm animals. As Britain's chief medical officer put it in his 2009 annual reports, every inappropriate use of antibiotics in agriculture is potentially signing a death warrant for a future patient. Antibiotics aren't the only dangerous thing we feed to farm animals, though. We used to feed cow brains to pigs and chickens until last year when Obama's FDA finally banned the feeding of cow brains to most farmed animals. Now, though it should have been a no-brainer, it took 12 years for them to take that step. Still doesn't go as far as Europe, which bans the feeding of cow brains to all farm animals, including farmed fish. Last summer, a group of neurologists raised the concern that by feeding cow brains to farmed fish, the consumption of farmed fish may provide a means of transmission for infectious prions from cows with bovine spongiform encephalopathy, mad cow disease, to humans. Now, this was in June. It was all just kind of theoretical until July. Researchers in Greece fed infected mad cow brains to fish to see what would happen. And although the fish appeared fine, you could see the disease building up in their systems. The neurodegeneration and abnormal deposition of the brains of fish challenged with prions, especially mad cow disease, raises concern about the potential risk to public health. The prospect of farm fish being contaminated with infectious prions or prion disease developing in farm fish is, in one word, alarming. Now, this is just for farm fish. I mean, wild fish don't tend to eat cows, obviously. Well, wait a second. If burgers don't contain brains anymore, what's in them? Well, fast food burgers, what are we really eating? Right? Published in the Annals of Diagnostic Pathology, these anatomic pathologists at the Cleveland Clinic recently dissected the burgers to see what was inside. Well, we eat 5 billion burgers a year, and most consumers presume that the hamburgers they eat are consumed primarily of meat. But what did they actually find? Well, they analyzed burgers from 8 different fast food joints, and they found, the same types of tissues that they observed in hot dogs, probably not a good sign. So they found, blood vessels and nerves and cartilage and swarms of these sarcocystis parasites. But how much of the burger was actually meat? Let's get our remaining few contestants back up, if you remember who you were. What percentage of a fast food burger is actually muscle flesh, as opposed to all these other tissues and parasites and fillers, etc.? All right, who thinks it's between 0 and 20%? Raise your hand. Who thinks between 20 and 40? Who thinks about half is meat? 40 to 60? How about 60 to 80? How many people think no? 80 to 100%. Almost all of a hamburger's meat. All right? Well, it wasn't 80 to 100, it wasn't 60 to 80, and it wasn't even 40 to 60. Meat content in hamburgers ranged from 2.1% to 14.8%. 2% meat? They're practically vegetarian. All right, you can sit back down. I'll get just you back up. Part of the other 85 to 98% that isn't meat, ammonia. Thanks to some excellent investigative reporting last year, we learned that a company developed a novel technique for killing off fecal bacteria, injecting beef with ammonia. The meat industry loved it so much, it became a multi-billion-dollar industry, made its way into most hamburgers produced in the United States, sold nationwide. McDonald's, Burger King, millions of pounds every year to our kids at school. This is what the process looks like. It produces what one USDA microbiologist called pink slime, saying he didn't even consider the stuff to be meat. And when the USDA says something isn't meat, that should tell you something. Not even good enough for prisoners in Georgia. They sent it back saying that the meatloaf stank like window cleaner. All right, why would they feed this to our kids? All right. Well, school lunch officials said they ultimately agreed to use the treated meat because it shaved about 3 cents off the cost of making a pound of ground beef. 3 cents. And even with the ammonia treatments, the Cleveland Clinic researchers found 1/4 fast food burgers contained parasites. But it's not just beef. There's a parasitic worm in fish called anisakis. We recently learned that about 2/3 of fish samples come up positive for them. This is what they look like. See, they're actually really quite small. You can see too here, kind of peeking out of some sushi here. Because people may eat fish raw, parasites are always concerned. But the unique thing about these worms is that our bodies can become so sensitive to them that they can trigger an allergic reaction, dead or alive, even if they're cooked. So we're finding that some people who are allergic to fish, really aren't allergic to fish. They're just allergic to the dead worms in the fish. In fact, because we feed so much fish meal to chickens, you can have an allergic reaction to a parasitic fish worm and not even eat any fish at all. Not to worry, though, our fish may have Benadryl in it. Because so many prescription drugs are excreted in the urine, when we pee them down the toilet, they may end up polluting our waterways and the fish in them. In fish fillets last year, they found Benadryl, Cardizem, Tegretol, Lopid, Zoloft, and Prozac metabolites. Right? Now, the level of the drugs found in these fish fillets was really low, but what if these compounds bioaccumulate in tissues or have unintended consequences from the complex mixture of contaminants we're exposed to in fish? Every 5 years, our government measures the amount of dioxins in our food supply. Dioxins are toxic waste pollutants that are spewed into the atmosphere, and they accumulate in the fatty tissues of humans and food animals consumed by humans. Generally believe that the most significant exposure to these dioxin-like compounds in humans is dietary intake of animal and fish products. But which are the worst? Let's get our remaining few contestants back up. Which is worse? Is there more toxic waste pollution in beef, cheese, chicken, eggs, fish, lamb, or pork? What do you think? Eggs. Pork. Fish. Pork. Pork. Whenever you hear toxic waste and diet in the same sentence, it is fish. Absolutely. We have so polluted our waterways. Everything eventually falls into the sea. We've so polluted our oceans that is the number one. And we have our second winner. Congratulations. In other words, come up afterwards and I'll give you your... All right, but which one goes down as number 2? Let's get everybody up and find out. Second only to fish in terms of toxic waste exposure in the American diet, how many people think it's beef, cheese, chicken, eggs, lamb, or pork? All right, well, here we go. Second only to fish. Eggs actually have the highest amount of dioxins in the American diet. That cleared out the room. All right, but I'll have you, the winner, sit down. I'll get just you up back next round. This finding may explain this study, this new study, egg consumption and the risk of cancer. Just a half an egg a day or more is associated with twice the risk of getting mouth cancer, throat cancer, esophageal cancer, and voice box cancer. 3 times the odds of getting colon cancer, about twice the odds of rectal cancer or lung cancer, 3 times the odds of breast cancer. Not an omelet, just a half an egg a day or more, and 3 times the odds of breast cancer, and about twice the odds of prostate cancer, bladder cancer, and all cancers combined. This was all eggs. Why the association? They didn't differentiate in the study between conventional and organic. Why this association between egg consumption and cancer risk? Well, it could be because of the dioxin levels we are now finding in eggs. So to find healthier chicken, fish, and eggs, all you need is a time machine and go back before the Industrial Revolution, another 100 to 2 years, and you're all set. This is from a study last year that measured the amounts of PCBs, DDT, dioxins, pesticides inside people's bodies. They looked at men, women, infants, children, all the way up through the elderly. Now, this red line represents the level at which the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, considers the level where there's significantly increased cancer risk due to these chemicals. Well, was there any age group that exceeded this level inside their bodies? Let's look. And as you can see, every single age group across the board, and you can't really see these colors too well, but as you can see, this level is PCBs, 10 times the benchmark level of PCBs. And then this next one is DDT, as you can see, kind of right along that level. DDT, wasn't that, a pesticide banned decades ago after Silent Spring came out? Well, certainly, but it's still polluting our environment. As the Centers for Disease Control pointed out, we are primarily exposed to DDT through meat, fish, and dairy products, although the levels continue to go down, though they'll still be in our food chain for another few centuries. A commentary in a journal called Reproductive Toxicology summarized the rather grim situation. Contemporary reproductive-aged women and their offspring are facing an unprecedented onslaught of toxicant exposures from a myriad sources in their day-to-day life. And it's not just cancer we're worried about. Increasing evidence suggests that maternal exposure to toxic chemical compounds has been associated with various birth defects, pediatric problems, skewed gender ratios, lethal cancer in children and teens, psychosexual challenges, as well as reproductive and hormonal dysfunction in later life. The author concludes, I anticipate that future generations of scientists will look back at disbelief at a medical culture that permitted poisoning of reproductive aged women and ignored ramifications to unborn children. But what if we don't eat any meats, eggs, dairy, fish? What is the impact of adopting a vegan diet? For example, on the levels of organochlorine compounds in our blood. Right? We had no idea until last year. What are organochlorines? Organochlorines are chemical products widely used after World War II, insecticides and other industrial uses. Now, in the 60s, we realized the adverse effects not only on the environment but human health, so they were banned. In the 1970s, in the industrialized world, including the United States, they are, however, resistant to degradation. Many of these persist, these pollutants persist, continue to be present in our food chain, and because of their love of fat, they accumulate in the fat tissue of organisms, and being at the top of the food chain, humans are contaminated via food in the infancy from breast milk, from what their moms ate, and then later from animal products such as fish, meat, and dairy. But vegans do not eat any animal products, right, which are the main source of these organochlorines, so their exposure should be theoretically lower than meat eaters. And now some studies have already shown that the concentrations of these compounds are lower in the breast milk or fat tissue of vegetarians compared to meat eaters. But what about real vegans? No one had ever studied them before now. What did they find? They ran the study, the experiment, and found that vegans were significantly less polluted than meat eaters, regarding a whole list of carcinogenic compounds and pesticides. Now, what actually surprised them is that vegans had as much as they did. Here's the data. As you can see, here's the average level of these compounds for vegans and omnivores, and regardless of what chemical, lower in vegans than omnivores. But why not an even bigger spread? Right. Well, the researchers offered a number of explanations. The vegans, for example, may have been breastfed as infants, and thus might have been exposed to the organochlorines accumulated by their mother, transferred to them during lactation. Right? Moreover, becoming a vegetarian or vegan is often a decision made in adulthood. Many of us were not born vegan, and so thus the omnivore diet followed when we were children, right, results in a contamination that is still detectable in adults. Right? In addition, vegans may, on rare occasions, depart from their diet and get contaminated that way. Before vegans get cocky, though, floppy ears are cute on a bunny. Not so cute on your spinal cord. The inverted rabbit ear sign, as you can see, it kind of looks like an upside down bunny rabbit with floppy ears. That is not what your spinal cord should look like. Why did this woman have spastic ataxic quadriparesis, a sensory polyneuropathy, and diffuse spinal cord swelling? Because she was a strict vegetarian lady. Now, I assume they mean strictly vegetarian lady, although maybe she was quite the disciplinarian. She certainly wasn't disciplined about taking her vitamin B12. People eating plant-based diets must ensure a reliable source of vitamin B12, and it's all on a handout, and if we don't have it here, you can email info@vsh.org and they will send it to you. Reports continue to pour in from around the world. Whether you're a vegetarian estricta, whether you're a streng vegane, or whether you're eating vegetarian, you'd have to be crazy not to get your B12, literally. 31-year-old stock trader turned paranoid psychotic, not because he was schizophrenic though, because he ate vegan and didn't eat vitamin B12 fortified foods or take a vitamin B12 supplement, suffered for 3 years before his doctors figured it out. Kiss me, I'm vegan. No, thank you. Vegan, woman, vegan for just 2.5 years without B12, Kiss a vegetarian and taste the difference before and after they take their B12. Vegans taste better when they take their B12. What other potential adverse effects might there be from eating a plant-based diet? Well, there's a stereotype, the angry vegetarian, right? Who wants to eat healthy if it'll just make you all cranky, right? Well, a new study was just released on the emotional health and mental well-being of vegetarians. Now, well, look, we know about the physical health benefits, but might that come at the cost of their mental health, particularly with regard to mood? So they used 2 psychological test regimens, what's called a POMS, a profile of mood states looking at depression, anger, hostility, fatigue, confusion, and then the depression, anxiety, stress scale. Looked at hopelessness, lack of interest, irritability, impatience, stress, anxiety, etc. What do you think they found? Let's get our remaining few contestants back up. Fact or fiction? Vegetarians tend to be, on average, more depressed, anxious, and sad. Who says fact? How many people say fiction? And the answer is fiction. Indeed. In fact, vegetarians reported significantly less negative emotions than meat eaters. Why, though? You can sit down while I explain. Well, it may be because of arachidonic acid, a component in meat that's metabolized to produce inflammatory mediators. In fact, that's how drugs like aspirin and ibuprofen work. They block the conversion of these compounds into these inflammatory mediators that cause inflammation, pain, and swelling. Here's a list of the top 10 sources of arachidonic acid in the American diet. Overwhelmingly, chicken and eggs, right? Although certainly there is some found in beef, pork, fish, etc. down the list, right? So maybe one reason why vegetarians are, on average, so much happier, more positive, is that arachidonic acid is a key substrate in the synthesis of these pro-inflammatory compounds, which can adversely affect mental health via a cascade of neuroinflammation, right? Brain inflammation. So omnivores may be more negative, depressed, stressed, hopeless, in part because their brains are literally so inflamed by their diet, particularly the chicken and eggs that they eat. Now, but fish, right? Fish is supposed to be anti-inflammatory, right? Let's find out. Fact or fiction? Fish oil decreases inflammation. It better. That's why people pay good money for it. Who says fact? Who says fiction? And the answer is, it's not true. No effect of fish oil supplementation on serum inflammatory markers. This is a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled study, whopping dose of fish oil. And if anything, there was a trend that all serum inflammatory markers tended to increase after fish oil. Right? You sit back down. We're getting there, though. Wait a second. The whole reason that people eat fish, take fish oil, is to decrease inflammation, right? Because of these long-chain omega-3 fatty acids like DHA, which are indeed anti-inflammatory. So there must be something else in the fish that's so increasing inflammation that it completely counteracts the long-chain omega-3s. And it's likely these industrial pollutants. We now know that the PCBs in fish can induce the same kind of inflammation that promotes obesity and atherosclerosis. It's the same reason why polar bears are now suffering chronic inflammation. Right? The industrial contaminants in our oceans that build up in fish fat. So when we take capsules of straight fish fat, it puts us in that same tenuous polar bear position at the top of the food chain, which is not where we want to be. You know, one of the difficulties in doing nutrition research is to try to accurately assess what people eat. Not what they say they eat, or not what they eat when someone's looking over their shoulder with a clipboard, right? But what they actually eat on average when no one's looking. That's why scientists love biomarkers, something you can actually measure to see how much of something they're actually eating. So, for example, there are these wonderful phytonutrients found in cruciferous vegetables, kale, collard, broccoli, that prevent cancer. But you can't just ask someone if they eat their greens because, they want to look good, so they fib a little bit, Not anymore, though. Now there's a urine test to see if people are actually telling the truth. Some employers test for drugs. Well, now you can test for greens, like a broccoli breathalyzer kind of thing, right? The important thing is that researchers can now accurately measure intake. Well, last year scientists discovered a biomarker for fish consumption, right? Like a tuna test. You take a sample of your blood and without asking you a question about your diet, can tell you how much fish you've been eating. What's the biomarker? Arsenic. Arsenic turned out to be the best indicator. Arsenic appears to be a useful biomarker for total fish consumption. Now, this was last year, 2009. This year, scientists may have come out with even better biomarkers for fish consumption, and that is dioxins, PCBs, and mercury. The most important fish consumption biomarker were dioxins and PCBs for men and mercury for women, right? A tighter correlation than even omega-3 levels, right? So you can tell how much fish people are eating by the amount of arsenic and toxic waste circulating through their systems. In fact, you can even take a strand of hair off their hairbrush and tell them how much fish they've been eating by the amount of mercury in that hair. This was actually a study done on children's hair clippings, but your entire body gets contaminated by this stuff. But what about distilled fish oil, right? You'll see things like this, right? You can't read this. Molecularly distilled for maximum purity. Well, researchers put fish oil distillation to the test last year. Let's get our remaining contestants back up. Fact or fiction? Fish oil is safe, but only if it's distilled. Who says fact? Who says fiction? The answer is fiction. It's not safe. That's why I recommend, again in the handout, these microalgae-based DHA. A win-win for humans. You can get all the benefits of the fish oil without the risks. Because our oceans are so polluted, even when you distill fish oil, you can't get off the hook. All right. Thank you so much for coming.
Wow, that was wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Michael Greger, for proving to us that learning the latest in clinical nutrition can not only be very useful, but fun, stimulating, and even profitable. So thank you all for coming, and we invite you to join us for some delicious vegan refreshments from Down to Earth over here in the kitchen on the side. Thank you so much for coming, and we hope to see you again next time. Mahalo.
This program is brought to you by the Vegetarian Society of Hawaii, a nonprofit organization dedicated to sharing with the community the many benefits of a vegetarian diet. Free monthly meetings include vegetarian experts found locally and on the mainland, quick and easy cooking demonstrations, and healthful and delicious food samples. Members enjoy an informative quarterly newsletter, social activities, and discounts at many vegetarian-friendly restaurants and health food stores. For an application, call 944-8344. That's 944-8344. Or visit our website at www.vsh.org. vsh.org.